you going to give Ken Loach a big round of applause?
I think it's a very important subject that we talk about today. The idea that ideas are so dangerous that you cannot hear them, and that ideas and stories are so monstrous that we cannot even take part in a discussion about them. And of course, the people who had a reputation for burning books are people that we remember either from the 16th century of the Counter-Reformation or the fascists, and now I'm afraid the Labour Party in Unite. And it's not a very happy trio to imagine we're part of. To put this into context, I thought it would be useful just to say something about the world we're living in. And if you follow politics, it's not easy to get shocked nowadays, is it? Every day we seem to hear new statistics. But just to take one that really shocked me the other day, and this is about hunger, about food, about people without food. And the Trussell Trust, I guess everyone knows the Trussell Trust, they provide food banks. They provide, I think, over half the food banks in the country, but then they are part of a much bigger, there's a much bigger network of people who support people who are going hungry with other kinds of institutions apart from food banks, whether they're kitchens or whatever. But this was a statistic the Trussell Trust brought out. 1 in 7 of people across the United Kingdom were experiencing food insecurity in the year mid-2022 to mid-22. That's what, a year ago. 1 in 7. And we estimate that this equates to around over 11 million people. 11 million people going without food or anxious that they won't have enough food for their kids. And of all the stats we hear, I thought, this is incredible. 11 million people. And that's the year ending, when was it, March 2023. The Trussell Trust, remember, like about a third of the food organisations, they distributed almost 3 million emergency food parcels between the 1st of April 2022 to 1st of March 23. And 1 million of those were for kids. 3 million. And in this wealthy country, I just found that an extraordinary stat. And just to top it off, if you happen to be from an ethnic minority background, then it is 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people will go hungry. 1 in 4 if you're from a minority ethnic background. So that's the world we live in. And we know that it is, we could have similar stats from the health service showing its collapse. We could have similar stats in education showing the problems that teachers have, similar stats in housing and homelessness, the problems of people without homes, the effect on kids living in temporary accommodation. I think it's I didn't write this down. I think it's about 130,000 kids in temporary accommodation. No secure home. What does that do to their schooling? What does it do to their security? What does it do to their sense of enjoyment of their childhood? I mean, it is shocking. The transporting chaos, as well, as we know. In fact, there's a general sense of society fragmenting. And then, on top of that, we have the climate disaster. And we see that, it affects different parts of the world every year. This year it's across southern Europe and in the States, where I think the temperatures are due to reach 55% in the next few days somewhere. And we have the hilarious spectacle of candidates for the Republican nomination saying climate change is a hoax. We had a brilliant comic earlier, but I think you'd be pushed to beat that for comedy, Pete. Sorry. So we're in an extraordinary state, an extraordinary situation, when we have this hunger on the one side, this lunacy on the other, and we have populist right-wing politicians gaining ground across Europe, in Spain, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Poland, in other Eastern European countries, the far right gaining ground. So we're in real trouble. The one thing we need is political leadership. The one thing we need is big structural change. We need a coherent analysis that speaks on behalf of ordinary people, that understands their interests and understands their needs, and understands the system we work under, that its inner contradictions will never be resolved, and we don't have that leadership. That's the problem we have. And as we see Labour getting closer to the Tories altogether. And we see Starmer approaching them, because his audience is not the electorate now. His audience are the newspaper owners who won't attack him in the run-up to the election, and the BBC won't attack him, the Guardian won't attack him, because he's a safe pair of hands. He won't make any changes. That's his reassurance to the ruling class. He won't change anything. And to prove it, he was quoted recently as saying, Labour reforms, he uses the word reforms, Labour reforms will go further and deeper than Blair. Now, we know what Blair was. Blair was privatisation, Private Financial Initiative, PPP. You remember prudent Gordon Brown, who just got us all into debt. Not very prudent. And the illegal Iraq war. Well, if that's Starmer's model, then God help us. And I have to speak. It's too good not to tell you this. Rachel Reeves, who had some rather unpleasant things to say about me in the Guardian the other day. But this is a choice from Rachel Reeves. This is what she said. You won't believe it. Labour is now the pro-business party. Labour, and this is the best, Labour is not the party of people on benefits. That is disgusting. That is disgusting. Because she knows that people on benefits are the most vulnerable people in our society. And if you don't stand by them, then you are no friend of ours. You are no friend of ours. So we have no friend. So the point is that Starmer is the choice of the ruling class for the next government. What does that mean? It means that he has to, well, he won't change anything substantial, but he has to be given a free ride. The establishment cannot allow stories or a bad press or anything that will stop him getting elected, because he's their man. To prove we're a democracy, we have to have a change of government. We can't keep having the party in the same, even though the party may do the same similar things. We can't have the same party in power, you know, after 13, 14 years, because we're not a democracy then. So there has to be an alternative. And their alternative is Starmer's Labour Party. And that's his project. So we can't hear bad things about him. So there has to be, then, censorship. There has to be manipulation of our views, of the public's views. There has to be the manipulation of news. What we are presented with as news is written and determined and chosen so that Starmer and the Labour Party are not seriously challenged. And I just want to say quickly a few things about the technique for manipulating consciousness before we then say, well, what are we going to do about it? For example, there are stories that you will not read in the mass media. You read them online, from left-wing groups. You will not read, for example, over 200,000 people have left the Labour Party. That's not a story. If that had happened under Corbyn, it would have been headlines. It would have been every day. Happened under Starmer, not a story. You will not hear that the candidates, Labour candidates, are all now, it seems all, whether even down to councillors, chosen by the central office, by the party headquarters, unless they've got stooges in the right-wing stooges in the constituencies. You do not hear that story. You did hear the Jamie Driscoll story, because it was a big constituency, but it was over very quickly, and he didn't get a good hearing. And the imposition now of a candidate from outside. But you do not hear, day after day after day, right-wing candidates being imposed when the constituency people choose their own candidate, a local candidate, maybe on the left. Party won't have it. You do not hear, and this again happens across the media now, you do not hear the Labour programme that Labour nearly won the election on in 2017. You don't hear it. And yet, that was we nearly won. A few thousand key votes in the key constituencies, Corbyn would have been in power. Well, he'd have been in government. May not have been in power. I think we'd have seen other shifts. But he would have won the election. We would have won that election. You never hear that programme. You never hear the programme for public ownership, for trade union rights, for universal human rights and international law, for a serious climate programme that would really get to grips with the climate emergency. You don't hear that. It doesn't exist. Corbyn himself is not allowed on. Left-wingers are barely allowed on to articulate it. Go to Newsnight, the Today programme, the BBC flagship programmes, you never hear a left voice. And yet it was the biggest party in Europe under Jeremy Corbyn. 600,000 people wiped out of the public consciousness. That's what you are not allowed to hear. Because if you do, it might throw some questions about Starmer. And he's their man. And then, of course, there are the banning and the direct censorship. Books. And books of what happened to remove Jeremy Corbyn from the leadership. And this is, again, is a story you are not allowed to hear. You can hear it on Al Jazeera, the Labour Party files. You can get it on your phone or whatever. That tells the story of how Jeremy Corbyn was removed. A political assassination, the journalist Peter Oborne called it, and the Labour right wing put the knife in. They were the assassins. Political assassination. That is not a story you are allowed to hear. But the truth will out, eventually. Chris Williamson has written a book. And are you here, Chris? Yes, great. Well, Chris will be talking about it, I'm sure. But Chris Williams has written a book explaining it. There are other books. Asa Winstanley has written a brilliant book, which I urge you to buy. Same as I urge you to buy Chris's book. I'll tell you a good ploy. Go into a bookshop, you know, your local bookshop, whatever it is, Waterstones or wherever, order 2 and only buy 1 and say, can you keep the other one for me? I don't need it now. And then it's in the shop and on view. So buy as many as you can, give them to your friends, because the story is remarkable. And the detail is brilliant in Chris's book and in Asa's book, and it lays it out very clearly. When you know that, when you know the reality of what they did and how it was organised and who was responsible, it changes the view of our democracy entirely. Because the question we have to ask, and it's a very serious question, is it possible to elect a party, a government, that will structurally change the balance of our economy and our society in favour of working class people. Because the experience with Corbyn is that it is not possible. They won't allow it. And remember the generals. Remember the general who spoke and said, if he were elected, we wouldn't tolerate it. The army wouldn't tolerate it. Nothing was done against him. I forget his name, but nothing was done against it. I'm sure some of you remember. Serious questions about the reality of the democracy we live in. But I'll say the truth will out, and we have to fight back. We have to fight back. And how do we do it? Now, for people here who are younger than me, and that's everyone in this audience, you will know how to use social media. I don't, but you will. So use that as far as you can. I mean, my kids tell me, my grandchildren tell me that it's very effective. So use it. And promote the books. Tell your friends again, promote the books. Promote the policies. Tell them about the Al Jazeera, the Labour Files programs. Tell them about the Al Jazeera, the Israeli lobby program. The lobby is called. Tell them about that. Join every local camp. When there's a local campaign, join it. Be part of it. There was a writer in the 30s, a man called Edward Underdown, who was a friend of Auden and Isherwood. And he wrote a book called No Home But the Struggle. And I'm afraid the bad news is, if you get in politics, it's a bug that's with you for the rest of your life. No home but the struggle. So that's the reality for us. You've got to get involved. You've got to be in the campaigns. Be active. Get to the core of things. Join the campaigns. No home but the struggle. And I think also now, and this is difficult ground, because I know there are some people who will stay in the Labour Party causing as much trouble as they can. That's fair enough. Some people will start new parties, and that's fair enough. That's a choice. It's a way of focusing our opposition. My fear is that we fall into the old left failure of sectarianism. And that is fatal for us. That is the one thing we must avoid. And even if some are in the Labour Party, even if some are in other parties, let's remember we stand on the same principles. So let's not fight each other. We must not fight each other. The only person who would benefit from that is Starmer. He's banking on it. He's banking on it. So let's say one thing. If you stand in one party and we stand on the same principles, I'll support you. I don't mind which party it is, because it's the principles that count. And that's why some of us are thinking, and this is just a thought at the moment, it's very exploratory. But what we can all unite on are the basic principles for socially just and economically just, sustainable society. We can unite on those principles. And that's not a threat to anyone. Stay in your campaigns, stay in the parties, stay in the Labour Party, but sign up to the principles. And we can all write them. Public ownership of our public services, the health service, particularly, the water, the post office, the gas, the electric, the transport, integrated transport, the trains and buses and trams where they are. Public ownership of the commanding heights of industry, because, and that becomes an international question, because now we're dealing with international corporations. But insofar as we can, public ownership, and working with international solidarity with other countries, European countries and from afar, for a foreign policy that is based on international law and based on universal human rights. And we oppose apartheid too, wherever we find it. We unite on those principles. We unite on trade union rights from day one. We unite on a serious Green New Deal. I don't even like the term Green New Deal now because it's been used to cover such inadequate policies. But we unite on a serious Green New Deal. Clearly, no fossil fuels from now on. Clearly, we've got to have clean air. Clearly, we don't compromise on that. And this trimming that Starmer is doing, saying, well, maybe you can have a bit more pollution because we lost a by-election. The man is a shallow opportunist, and we cannot be governed by him. Anyway, the truth will out. Speaking of censorship, I just want to end on a quote from George Orwell. Actually, before I get to the quote, I have to tell you, I know Audrey White's going to speak, and Audrey's a great comrade and a great friend. But I have to tell you, this is the first time I have ever been a warm-up act for Miss July. Now, I don't know if you've seen the calendar, but it's not quite as racy as you might think, but it's a bit saucy, I have to tell you. Anyway, I don't know if Audrey's next, but she'll be good, as will Chris and whoever comes. But the quote from Orwell is this, and it's worth remembering. When Sharon Graham and you Unite say you can't watch this story because you can't read this book, you can't watch this film. Remember Orwell. The past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became the truth. We have to make certain that the lie is not the truth. We remember what we nearly achieved with Jeremy Corbyn. We remember the principles that will change society for the better. And we fight for them, and we bloody well win. Solidarity.